Welcome into the midweek mailbag show presented to you by Fantasy Points. My name is Nick Skrip, and I take your questions from Twitter and our Fantasy Points subscriber Discord every week and answer them here on this specific show. Rocking the Jalen Hurts jersey, like I said I would, to my buddy Ben from Fantasy Points. But we have some great questions as we have 2 weeks of football now in the books. So a lot of people want to know if they should panic about certain players, how to value certain guys moving forward. And it was interesting to see some of these questions for players that I think a lot of people want to know a little bit more details about in how some of us view situations. So the first question comes from at Mr. Oaks _ on Twitter. He asks, Penny panic time, ? DJ Moore panic time, ? So he's asking here, should we be panicked about Rashad Penny from the Seahawks, the running back, and DJ Moore, the wide receiver from the Carolina Panthers? So let's talk about Penny. Week 1 versus Denver, 12 carries for 60 yards. Not the volume you wanted, but good yards per carry there. He saw 3 targets, which is a decent sign, seeing as though he only saw 3 targets one time in 2021. 7.7 fantasy points, not great, but what was good was that he saw 69% of the snaps. Now we flash forward to week 2 versus the 49ers. 6 carries for 15 yards. So the yards per carry were pretty much cut in half right there. He had 0 targets in this game, and the snap percentage went down to 41. Kenneth Walker III, the rookie out of Michigan State, saw his first action after coming off of that surgery and not playing in the first game. Kenneth Walker III, 6 total touches with 2 being catches on 24% of the snaps. So Penny had 41%. Kenneth Walker III in his first game had 24%. Neither guy did anything worth really noting. Atlanta and Detroit are next. So if this is a sign to come, though it might not be a great, it might not have been the best start. Maybe we can look at some of these matchups upcoming between Atlanta and Detroit and say, hey, maybe we can find some success from Rashad Penny if he is the lead back. But I think I'm a bit concerned seeing that Kenneth Walker came in straight away and had 6 total touches, which was the same amount of touches as Rashad Penny in their last game. Obviously, the 49ers are a tough matchup, but to see both guys splitting the work like that and neither one of them really having much pass catching upside as far as PPR goes, I am concerned about Penny. I'm not sure how comfortable I am rolling him out, knowing that in the second week already, it's a 50-50 split between him and Kenneth Walker. Atlanta, Detroit, unless one of these two guys completely takes the work, I'm not super comfortable putting in either one of those running backs. I doubt both guys are going to get like 15 touches in this game, even if they do take a lead. DJ Moore on the other side, on the field nonstop, 100% week 1 and then 97% of the snaps in week 2. He's had exactly, which is strange, he's had exactly in the first 2 weeks, each game, 6 targets, exactly 3 receptions, and exactly 43 receiving yards. He did score in week 2. I think he might have ran the ball in week 1. But it's wild that he had identical targets, identical receptions, and identical receiving yards week 1 and week 2. So 6 total catches on 12 total targets for 86 total receiving yards. That is a stat line you would want probably out of him in one game, not 2 games combined. He had 7 individual games of 6 catches or more in 2021. So we know that he can produce at that sort of level. He probably should, is the lead wide receiver in Carolina. 8 and 13.3 fantasy points. So not the best start out of DJ Moore. I think Baker Mayfield is a big part of the issue here. He currently has a completion percentage of 53.6. That's bad. He passed for only 145 yards last game. That's bad. 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio across 2 games, nothing special. So DJ Moore, 3 straight seasons above 1,100 receiving yards. I do believe in the talent of DJ Moore. He's been consistent in the yardage department. He's been a good fantasy piece, and he's had some iffy situations when it comes to the quarterback. We need to see him closer, though, to 10 targets than 5. So seeing back-to-back weeks of 6 targets, not exactly what you want out of somebody that probably should be the alpha wide receiver over there. So hopefully this is just Baker still getting used to the system, the playbook, and DJ Moore. So when it comes to both of those guys, Rashad Penny, DJ Moore, more concerned about Rashad Penny. DJ Moore, I like the talent a lot. I don't think I'm ready to completely be out on him just because the volume and the production has not been what we wanted. Question 2 at Stella's dad. What are we doing with Russell Wilson? So another concern here. QB 20 right now across 2 weeks for fantasy. So obviously 2 weeks is a small sample size, but 43 for 73, 58.9 completion percentage, 559 passing yards, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception, just like that guy Baker we just mentioned, through 2 games. One game was a loss to Seattle, who the 49ers just smoked, and the other was to Houston, who actually gave them a game after a Colts tie, but we don't regard them as a powerhouse, right? So not the best start for the Broncos, not the best start for Russell Wilson. You can blame Russ getting used to his new home, maybe the new head coach in Nathaniel Hackett. I think there's better days to come, though, with Cortland Sutton. Hopefully Jerry Jeudy's healthy, and Javonte Williams and the rest of the gang over there. 49ers are up next, though, so it doesn't get easier. I'd guess, I guess this is going to be a tougher matchup than the first two if I had to, just project how this is going to go. As far as what you're doing with Wilson, you're not cutting him, in one quarterback leagues. There's no reason to really trade him away right now because what realistically do you think you're going to get unless somebody's so desperate and just lost Dak Prescott or lost Trey Lance? So it really depends on who else you have. Wentz is on fire right now. Tua looked great last week. Mariota and Geno, they have good matchups if you want to get a little risky there. It's that line drawn between streaming until it looks better for Russell Wilson or just going with Russell Wilson because he's the most talented quarterback that you might have to work with. So a lot of what you are doing with Russell Wilson really depends on your roster makeup. If you want to stream, again, it depends on who's available. But again, you kind of got to draw that line between getting too cute and rolling with Russell Wilson and just hoping that we see better days. This would be an iffy matchup, though, to seeing 2 games that were not that great for fantasy. At McBreeze 11, how concerned are you about Kyle Pitts? So another guy with the exact same stat line back-to-back weeks, 2 catches for 19 yards in both weeks. So him and DJ Moore said we're just gonna have mirrored first 2 weeks, and hopefully the rest of the weeks are just an uphill progression from there. But he had 7 and 3 targets, 3.9 fantasy points apiece in those games. Not what you wanted out of Kyle Pitts. So with Kyle Pitts, we got to look at the bigger picture, obviously, when it comes to these situations. Right now for fantasy, the big picture is tight end 35. We probably wanted him to be a top 3 tight end. He was being drafted as so. Only 26 attempts last game, though, so not huge volume to really go around. Drake London had a huge game, though, last week. 8 catches for 86 receiving yards on 12 targets. I think having London emerge hopefully will draw more attention to other guys on the field over Kyle Pitts. Marcus Mariota said there was a couple of moments when the Rams were double covering Pitts. And there was a quote here. Just the way the game flows, where he's going to get his targets, he's going to find the ball will come to him. These first couple weeks, it just hasn't happened that way. So obviously the quarterback situation, the quarterback acknowledges what's going on and that it hasn't been great. I think that's a good sign that he at least recognizes this. A lot of knocks on the usage and the game plan by head coach Arthur Smith, who was quoted saying, "It's not fantasy football. We're just trying to win, and we'll continue to look at everything and try to get better." I'm still rolling with Pitts against Seattle this week. Guy had over 1,000 receiving yards his rookie year. He's one of the best tight end prospects we've ever seen. He's a freak athlete. He looked great in preseason, too. If I'm trusting anyone to get it right, and I know we'll talk about a lot of people concerned on this podcast, it's Kyle Pitts for me. I just believe too much into the talent that everything else will fall into place. I think the targets will jump up. I think the production will be there. He's too good not to be utilized. So I think Arthur Smith can say all he wants that it's not fantasy football, but at the end of the day, if he wants to keep his job, he's probably going to have to use the best player on his team in Kyle Pitts. I'm good with him against Seattle. At Hey, Mr. Holman, do you think Tua has made himself a viable QB1 option? So just to be on the same page with everybody, QB1 typically refers to a top 12 quarterback for fantasy. Tua was my personal breakout candidate prior to the year starting. Not victory lapping, but I am saying that I was high on him coming into the year. I think he's an accurate quarterback that is very competent, and I think the system that was being built around him was good, and we've been seeing it. He's quarterback 5 currently, guided by that massive week in week 2, 40.86 fantasy points. He had 469 passing yards and 6 passing touchdowns. He is the 6th best completion percentage with 71.1 currently. He's leading the NFL in passing yards, and he's tied now in touchdowns, again, mostly through that last game. So we can't overreact to one massive game, but we should recognize that the trio of Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Tua look great. I noted from last season on Twitter and on podcasts before how Jimmy Garoppolo for the 49ers was top 12 in passing yards, but number 24 in air yards. How does that work? Well, he was guided by the yards after catch abilities of Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle. Same sort of system. You got the offensive coordinator, Mike McDaniel, now the head coach of the Dolphins, and you have 2 of the fastest wide receivers that provide a ton of yards after the catch. But the deep ball was a question, and we've seen plenty of that so far, especially in this last game. Tua finding both Waddle and Tyreek Hill deep. So again, like what I said before, I think it depends on who you have. If you were streaming quarterbacks before and Tua was one of them, I think you're more confident that, hey, I don't have to look to stream every week. I think I can roll this guy out until something looks different. So I do think that if you were streaming him or you picked him up off waivers, you should be happy right now with that pickup. Some teams have lost Dak. Some teams have lost Trey Lance. If you were one of those teams that lost Dak or Trey Lance and you have Tua, you should be happy right now because it's almost like you had a backup plan that turned into a really good game plan for the quarterback position. I think he can finish top 12. All right, you got those 2 guys out of the mix. There's other guys not performing well right now, and I think the system is one that supports Tua. I think Tua is a competent and accurate quarterback. And I think we're seeing the upside in passing yards because of those 2 guys, upside in passing touchdowns. We just seen it. It wasn't a walkover game when they played Baltimore. It wasn't. So when it comes to Tua, again, it depends on who you have. You're not like sitting Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert for Tua. But again, a lot of teams have been struggling in the quarterback department right now with guys being bad or being injured. So if Tua is the guy that you were juggling to start every week because of your situation on your roster, I'm cool with him the rest of the season. Richie DeLuca. So this one is from Discord. Is Burrow safe against the Jets in week 3, or is Carr the better option against the Titans? So we will run into these situations as fantasy managers throughout the entire year. You look at the matchup, you look at what guys have been doing, and you want to play the right guy. And sometimes we hit, sometimes we miss. And, matchups are a factor. Performances, we got to make sure that we pay attention to what's going on. So let's talk about these guys, specifically Joe Burrow here. The biggest issue with Joe Burrow right now, I think, is the protection. 13 sacks across 2 games. That's horrible. 3 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Not good. I mean, all those interceptions came from week 1, but still, it's not ideal knowing the weapons he has in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. Hayden Hurst has been getting some targets. Mixon can catch the ball. So far, the Jets only have 3 sacks in 2 games, though. So that's good to note. So obviously, different offensive lines, different teams. But hopefully that's a sign that against the Jets, we don't have to worry about Joe Burrow being sacked 7 times again. Looking at points per game. So for these 2 quarterback matchups, again, Burrow versus the Jets, Carr versus the Titans. The Jets have allowed the 13th most points per game so far to quarterbacks, and the Titans have allowed the 7th most points per game. So it's only 2 weeks, and the actual matchups are what matters here. The sample size is very important. It's just something to note. It's interesting here that Carr is brought up, though, because he's actually been worse for fantasy in total fantasy points across 2 weeks than Joe Burrow. Both have solid weapons. I talked about Joe Burrow's Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, game one, getting those 17 targets. Obviously, he's been hyper targeting his wide receiver that he played college ball with. Darren Waller stepped up in week 2. Hunter Renfro's a guy that was top 12 last season. It's a good system as well to be in. I'm going to go with the guy that I had ranked higher going into the season, which is Joe Burrow. He's performed technically better in those first 2 games. I think we just notice it more with Joe Burrow because we have high expectations for him. And if he has a bad game versus when Derek Carr has a bad game, I think more people are going to point to Joe Burrow and say, oh, this guy looks bad and what's going on. So the fact that the Jets have not been getting to the quarterback enough, I think it's a good matchup. I think it's a good bounce back day for Joe Burrow. I think they're going to throw the ball enough. I think that they as a team want to look better. They've had a rough start, the Bengals, just in general, to their season after being in the Super Bowl. So I'm going to still roll with Joe Burrow against the Jets. The biggest thing for Joe Burrow, though, is he needs better protection. I thought the protection increased for the Bengals in the offseason, but right now it doesn't look like the case. But at least they're playing a team that's not really getting to the quarterback. So I think the common theme, guys, in this episode is guys that we might be worried about. And I think overall, the biggest factors to pay attention to are upcoming matchups in who teams have played against before. Look at snap percentages. Look at targets. I read off some coaches' quotes and some quarterback quotes. Sometimes those can be hearsay. Sometimes they go a long way. McVay just said he wanted to get Allen Robinson back involved, and he was more involved in their second game for the Rams, just as one example. But don't panic drop. Don't panic sell for cheap because, again, we saw last year guys like Najee Harris, for example, didn't have a great start to the season. Jamar Chase wasn't electric every single week in the beginning of the season. And, I can go and pinpoint certain other examples, but you can address some of these concerns by sitting guys if you feel like you have better options. But when it comes to dropping or trading, be smart about it. Don't be afraid to ask some of your favorite analysts, ask some of the guys, from Fantasy Points. They'll be able to answer your questions when it comes to trading or how to deal with the team. But again, thank you guys for tuning into this episode. It's every single week. I ask for questions on Monday. You can shoot over those questions on Twitter or in the Fantasy Points Discord. Let's get some W's this week, guys. And thanks again for tuning into this show.